So this part of the brain this part of the video and the brain gets especially technical, but I feel that explaining to you in detail, this is something you can read up as well. I'm sure you can watch YouTube videos about it, but I want to explain this to you in detail. Having the understanding of the biological response to trauma, the biological, what happens biologically to our bodies and to our brains helps you to understand trauma in a very specific way. So I'm going to ask you to have lots of patience with me as I go through this in very, very careful detail. I've decided to use as you see in front of you, this is called the truant brain. So they break the brain up in its particular ways, which I'm going to explain to you now. I've written quite a lot about this, so I'm going to explain it to you as slowly as I can. But I do know that many of you may have heard about this before, may have seen many parts of this before. So the only reason I'm explaining to you in such detail is because I want you to make connections for yourself about how this would affect learning. Pause the video, think about it, make notes, because this is going to be something that would be good for you to keep for your learning for later on. Okay, so when we experience a traumatic event or we have a traumatic experience, our body immediately takes over because we've been made in a way that if you think about hunters and gatherers, you need to constantly interact with your environment. You need to react to whatever's happening in your environment. So your body will take over during a traumatic event and respond in a way which is completely involuntary. So sometimes you've heard husbands run away from their wives in a traumatic experience, or women suddenly just run and they can lift up a car because the husband or the child is stuck, whatever the case is. It's completely involuntary. It's innate, it's primal. It comes from a deep oldest part of our brains and oldest part of our primal ability to do what we need to do. So you may have heard of the flight and fight and freeze response. This is what gets activated when you're in a threatening situation. So I want us to look at this in a very biological way, from a very biological level. So as human beings, our most innate and instinctive behavior is to protect ourselves and to stay alive. That is instinctively what our body and brain does. Our brains, and by connection, our bodies, have a way of responding to trauma and to stress, which is nature's way of allowing us the best chance of survival. So, in order to explain this, I want to use the truant brain that you see in front of you. The truant brain is the breakdown of the brain structured into three distinct parts, as you can see here. Namely, the reptilian brain, which is at the bottom, the basal ganglia, which is a fight or flight, which is very automatic. Then we have the limbic system, which is the next part of it. And then the neocortex, which is the newest part of the development of the brain, and it's like this right over here. And you often hear about the frontal lobe, which is essentially learning, that falls under the neocortex. The reptilian brain, which is the one at the bottom here, is what is the core, or what is known as the most ancient part of the brain. It's also called the survival brain. It controls our most basic automatic functions, your primal drives, your self-preservation responses, things like your breathing, your eating, your muscle control, reproduction. Those types of things are all under the basal ganglia or the primitive reptilian brain. The parts of the reptilian brain include the cerebellum, the reticular formation, and the brainstem, which contains the medulla oblongata. So then the limbic system, which is this part over here, the social emotional, it's called social emotional system, or the paleo-mammalian brain. They call it the animal or emotional brain, or the part that deals with pain and pleasure. More specifically, it drives us towards opportunities for experiencing pleasure and away from situations that may cause us pain. So the limbic system also houses archetypal memories, so things that help you to navigate in the world and understand symbols and things in the world. So it houses the archetypal memory and emotions, and it is where mammals evolve their maternal and attachment functions for nurturing. So this is where you get that motherly response or that connections, your relationships. If this is damaged, it affects attachment. And in the next, one of the next units, we'll be talking about attachment, and you'll see how important it is for attachment to work well. So both parts of the brains I talked about now, these two at the bottom here, or the inner and then the one that comes around it, they are unconscious or subconscious. They're the old parts of the brain. They work automatically. Then we're looking at the neocortex, which is this part over here. The neocortex is the newer or the younger part of the brain. It's a lot more sophisticated. It's conscious, but it's also slower. So it takes 500 to 600 milliseconds for an experience to be registered with the conscious part of the brain, which is this neocortex. while the amygdala can react to a stimulus or a threat within 50 milliseconds. Then the other parts, also known as the, like as I said, the neocortex or the thinking brain. This area of the brain is concerned with executive functioning, logic, thoughts, meaning making, voluntary motor control. So when you want to do something that is, voluntary, not involuntary, voluntary things you want to pick up and so on, this part of the brain also functions of discernment, associations, etc. So this part of the brain is very involved in learning, in planning, in your ability. So if there's a damage to your neocortex, you'll have difficulty learning. There'll be that. This is where they talk about things where students have barriers to learning. It often happens in the neocortex part of the brain. The cortex or neocortex is divided into 4 different areas or lobes. So namely the occipital lobe, which is responsible for your vision. The I can never say this, parietal lobe, Parietal, one of those words that I struggle to say, divided into 2 parts. It receives and processes sensory information. So from your senses, information from your senses, it gets processed here, and interpreting visual information and processing language and mathematics. So think about the fact, if there's a damage to this lobe, how will it affect your language and your mathematics? The temporal lobe also, it processes memories. So that's also what we have here in our neocortex. And your frontal lobe, like in front, your cognitive functioning. So things like your executive functioning, your motor performance, and your voluntary movement. So if there's a damage to your cognitive functioning, it will affect your ability to do voluntary movements. When we experience a traumatic event, the primitive, the faster part of the brains, right, they take over automatically in order to give us the best chance of survival, because they're faster, they respond better to the environments, they're quick. The amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, which is this middle part, the social emotional part, is responsible for our survival instincts, for fear, for learning, as well as the process of emotion. So when we experience a traumatic event, the alert signal in this part of the brain and our hypothalamic pituitary gland, or HPA axis, the brain and the body stress response system, this is activated. So your brain and your body stress system works together. This is activated. So in simple terms, very simple terms, we're in survival mode. Our fight, flight, or freeze responses are activated. And when this alert is signaled, all the systems of the body that are not essential to survival are switched off or frozen. The blood and the oxygen diverted to our muscles. The blood and the oxygen, so all the blood and oxygen goes throughout our body and our brain, but all of it at that time is diverted to the muscles in order to get you ready to function at your optimal instinctive and survival level. So all that goes into your muscles in your legs and your arms, so you're able to run and be stronger and do things you don't necessarily have to do, because all of the oxygen and blood gets diverted. That's why oftentimes after a traumatic event you feel quite lightheaded, because the blood and the oxygen has been rushed to your muscles to be able to do what you need to do. The hippocampus, which is usually responsible for the storage of new memories. Now, this is very important. The hippocampus, which is usually primarily responsible for the storage of new memories and past memories, or your long-term memories, this stops functioning during a traumatic event. And this is maybe why the survivors, or it is why the survivors of traumatic events often don't remember what happened. They have skewed memories of events. Even children have experienced abuse, they have skewed memories of events. They struggle to remember things. There is a definite difficulty with long-term and short-term memory. Then besides the hippocampus, which is responsible for your memory, your hypothalamus, this is what governs our endocrine system, the releasing of the 8 major hormones. It sends signals to the pituitary gland, which signals that the adrenal gland to release the stress hormone. So now your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, which keeps us from feeling pain. So I'm talking a lot here, I'm giving you a lot of long words, and it sounds like a lot of biology, but essentially all of these things work together. Your memories are now challenged. You have the superhuman sometimes strength and ability to react in a situation, or you freeze, your body just freezes. Adrenaline gets pumping, so now your body is like in a different state, and it's in a survival state. You are hyper vigilant, you're hyper aware, because your body is trying to make sure that you don't feel pain, your heart function is increased, your airways are open, your pupils are dilated, so you can best get through this event and you can survive. So you're hyper vigilant, you're super aware, you're ready to respond to the environment. So this happens in the case of a single event. But when there's a case of the child or adult who is persistently in a traumatic situation, so all of that is happening in a single event that I just told you about. But think about the child or the individual who is consistently in a persistent traumatic state, of abuse or consistently in a war situation, in pandemics, whatever the case is, then this person is experiencing this on an almost daily basis. Every time they are hyper vigilant, their memories, their difficulty with memories, this difficulty with them to be able to concentrate. It's difficult for them to be able to focus, concentrate still. So this child is in a hyper vigilant state. How are they able to listen to you when their body is constantly waiting for a threat? They want to respond to a threat because their body and mind is used to being constantly and consistently responding to a threat, shutting down, freezing, doing whatever they need to do to protect themselves. Your voice shouting in a class might be a trigger. The children in the class bullying that child might be a trigger. Learning is often very, very, very low on their list. So I'm pausing a little bit what I want to talk about, and I just want to stop here to think about the experience of the child in your classroom who has been traumatized on a daily basis, sitting in your class now, expected to learn, but their body is on high alert. They're unable to calm down. There's been nothing to help them get into the state of calm, get into the state of focus, because this morning they just came from a home where they were shouting, where there was whatever that was going on that has put them into this hyper arousal state. So in psychology, we use a book called the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, which is the DSM-5. Basically, it categorizes all the mental disorders that exist, the barriers that of learning that exist, abuse, all of those types of things. So PTSD falls under the category of trauma and stress-related disorders. And PTSD is defined as I said earlier, a mental health condition which is caused by experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event for which intervention has not been received. And after a traumatic experience, most people do go through a very difficult and challenging period where they find it difficult to cope, to go on with life as normal. It's very difficult for them because this traumatic event has taken place. If you do get successful intervention, you can go to back to life, to quote unquote normal life quite quickly. But you'll always remember the event with some stress or anxiety. If you're unable to return to quote unquote normal functioning and you consistently, like a child in an abuse situation, consistently experience symptoms such as flashbacks, if you're not getting this good support, if you're unable to get help, you'll you'll be experiencing flashbacks, numbness, loss of appetite, depression, nightmares. You're not interested in schoolwork, you're not interested in friends. It comes across as if you're lazy, you're just sitting there, not focusing, not paying attention. This person may have PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, or consistently being exposed to the stress. In cases of long-term abuse or domestic violence, where a person um, experiences this on a regular and long basis, you may develop complex PTSD. So the person is now going to be hyper vigilant in a constant state of alert, getting into fights very easily. Basically, the alarm system, the brain becomes jammed, and the person is basically at the mercy of triggers all around them that can affect the person's functioning. So this, you can imagine, is so stressful for a child. They are on constant alert, they are stressed, there are triggers all around them, but they are asked to sit still and learn. Their primary focus is, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we'll see in the next video, Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that we need to first have our basic needs met in terms of food and a place to stay, and things like safety and security, emotional and physical safety and security need to be met in order for us to be able to do what we need to do. In cases when they are not met, you first need to really get that right before a child is able to learn, because when they are not met, the child can't focus. It's very hard for them to be present in the classroom space. So I'm hammering on and on about this because I want us to be so aware of how trauma can be a barrier to learning. It can be a barrier for us, a barrier for a child to express how intelligent they actually are, or what their type of intelligence is, because we don't have to only look at children that are very high functioning in terms of intelligence, but any child, what they can't even express what they're able to do because they're in a constant state of trauma and stress. So I want us just to have a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we'll continue in the next video.